This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Shawn Powers and I are talking with Paula Hunter of Mojaloop. Mojaloop is the rails for payments between banks and phone companies and in people working with cash of many different currencies in disadvantaged parts of the world, especially Africa. Really interesting stuff because they're at the leading edge of open source in payments. It's really critical. It's being used widely now, and it's a moving target, and you're going to find out so much that's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 654, recorded Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. Financial Inclusion and Mojaloop. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. The U.S. Postal Service processes more than 98,000 address changes daily. Is your customer contact data up to date? Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. Good morning, good evening, good day or night, wherever it is, wherever you are in the world. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly. And I am joined today by the great Shawn Powers, whose power will appear on our screen and our microphones everywhere. There he is. I can see him.
I don't know where the great Shawn Powers is, but the average normal Shawn Powers is here.
We couldn't get him. We had to sell it for you.
Fair enough.
He comes up our bench as the other Shawn Powers, with a 0 for the O, as I recall.
That's true.
Famous, going to be famous cartoonist, among many other things, and colleague from Linux Journal in years past. Video veteran. So our subject today is Mojaloop. Are you familiar with it?
Well, it depends on what you call familiar. I read up. I always try to read up so I know what I'm talking about and I can ask good questions. But I have to admit, this time I'm going to be playing the part of the dumb guy who doesn't get it, and I'm going to be asking questions like, "So, what is it?" Because I read a lot of information.
We are going to find out.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we are going to find out. And I want to jump into this because I think it's going to be an action-packed hour. But first, I have to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Having accurate customer address data is crucial for the success of your business. Did you know that nearly 36 million address changes were processed by the USPS, the U.S. Postal Service, in 2020? That's a huge chunk of customers you could be missing out on. 30% of customer data goes bad every year, but Melissa can help make sure your data is current and accurate. Melissa's tools have helped businesses maintain fresh data for over 35 years, which explains why over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. Melissa has a renewal rate of over 92%. And why is that? Well, it's because 25% is the typical ROI realized by Melissa customers. You can verify addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time with Melissa. Melissa's global address verification service verifies addresses for over 240 countries and territories at the point of entry. Tired of having duplicate customer information in your database? With Melissa's data matching, you can eliminate clutter and duplicates, increase accuracy of the database, and reduce postage and mailing costs. Get the information that completes your customer profiles better. Add customer demographic info to your records, such as marital status or social media handles. Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, business size, or budget. With flexible on-premise web service, secure FTP processing, and software as a service, that's SaaS, delivery options. Melissa also has their new Lookups app on iOS and Google to search addresses, names, and more at your fingertips. Melissa continuously undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. Those include SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliance. Melissa's Global Support Center also offers 24/7 world-renowned support if you sign up for a service-level agreement. So inquire today. Melissa is still supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online at melissa.com. In G2 Crowd's 2021 Grid Report, Melissa scored 89% for ease of use, 91% in quality of support, 96% in ease of doing business with, as well as 93% meets requirements. So you can see their commitment to providing the best data quality and address verification software around. Make sure your customer contact data is up to date. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log in, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. Okay, so I want to welcome to the show Paula Hunter. Paula and I had a great conversation about Mojaloop and what Mojaloop's doing a few weeks ago, and it was so interesting to me that I just had to have her on the show. Mojaloop's a really original approach to a whole lot of things. So I actually want to get started. Are you there, Paula? I need to see you on our screen. For those of us on the radio, I need to see you on our screen. See, give us the top down on where Mojaloop came from and what it's trying to do. There's a hole in the world there where you're working.
Sure. Mojaloop was initially dreamed up at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They had a number of initiatives focused on financial services for the poor. And what they recognized was that there was at least 2 billion people out there that are unbanked or underbanked by the financial sector. And so they looked into why and what could they do about it. And part of the whys have to do with access, local access to banking institutions and branches just not available in rural communities. Costs, it's very expensive to transact financial transactions in developing countries right now. So many of the banks don't find it an appealing market because it is so just dispersed and challenging to meet. So what the Gates Foundation thought was, what if we could reconfigure the plumbing for this financial sector and allow people to tap into an interoperable set of rails that would allow money to flow across many different actors, central banks, digital financial service providers, merchants, and reduce the interoperability challenges and reduce the cost of deploying such infrastructure. That would potentially attract new investment, new financial actors in the space, and reach those individuals that aren't served today. I mean, if you can imagine making $100 a month, maybe you operate a little roadside stand and you sell goods from that roadside stand every day. But at the end of the week, you need to pay your rent or utilities. You have to walk 2 miles, 3 miles with cash in your pocket to make that payment. And then maybe the next week you want to send money to a sibling or a family member in another country. Again, a long walk and another transaction. And every one of those transactions is costly. It could be like 8% transaction cost. If you're making $100 a month, not only is it physically challenging, is it going to be a safety issue carrying cash, but also the transaction costs are eating away at that money that you make every month. So if we can reduce the cost of transactions, if we can use innovative technologies rather than dealing with legacy implementations, use smartphones, but not high-end smartphones, using things like QR codes and such to implement new ways for them to transact money. We can bring more and more people into this digital world and reduce their dependency and risks associated with cash.
So, I have several thoughts here. One is Well, first, where are you most active in the world right now geographically?
Our focus has been Africa because that's the highest percentage of population that's unserved. But there are pockets in Indonesia. We see some traction in places like the Philippines, Myanmar. Developing countries by and large.
So yesterday I was in a conversation where somebody said that actually cash is the great equalizer, in this sense that, and actually it was about, and I don't know if this is relevant to where you're coming from or not, but it struck me as possibly relevant. Everybody in the West, everybody in the developed world wants to get subscriptions going and wants to make money on subscriptions. But what subscriptions do is they kind of ace out everybody who can't afford them. So they're better off on an a la carte basis. And I'm wondering if in your parts of the world, the a la carte approach to using cash is better than the subscription method that's kind of growing in the West. It's probably an unrelated conversation, but I just wanted to kind of run it past you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly cash is king right now in the markets we work in. But as I mentioned, there are some barriers there. And there's risks. And even when you look at COVID, more and more governments want to, start migrating away from cash for aid payments and other distributions. So we're not suggesting cash go away, but for the individual that's unbanked today, in order for them to attract business with a utilities provider, with a sibling in another country, with other payments and procurements, they still have to convert that cash. And oftentimes when they're converting that cash into some type of payment or transfer, they're paying a transaction fee. So we're not suggesting that they go into a subscriber model per se, but that they we make mechanisms available for them to be part of the digital economy, but not at the costs that would be prohibitive for them to participate in.
So I say we also have back channel here, so I was waiting for Shawn to jump in with a question he's asking me about asking. So you want to go ahead, Shawn, with that?
Sorry, yeah. I just have a lot of questions, and I didn't want to dominate the show. I know that Doc had things to ask, but I love the idea of making transactions more reachable and more attainable and open, all those things. I'm curious about your application or your framework specifically. Is it that it handles the middleware between where the money is and where it needs to go? I have lots of questions, so I'll just start with that. I guess, where does your product sit? Is it between the payee and the payer, or is there a front end portion of it as well? I guess, where does your end and the bank holding money begin? Right.
So we are, if you think of us, we're the plumbing. In the analogy of the trains, we're the rails for the train. We do not have a UI for the end consumer. The relationship with the end consumer, the individual, would be a merchant, their mobile network operator, a bank. So there's many scenarios: a fintech, a microfinance institution, the government itself. So many different entities could have a relationship with that individual. We would provide the rails by which they all can interoperate. So what you find now is there's a lot of stovepipes. So where there is digital implementations like M-Pesa, for example, to get out of that network becomes challenging. So what we want to make sure is that if all these different options are interoperable, if someone wants to transfer money from their mobile network via their mobile network carrier to another individual in another country, they don't have to match mobile network operators. They don't have to match currencies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's up to the implementer of Mojaloop, the one that is integrating their community to ensure that they're all operating on the same rails. I'll give one example. We're in the process of working with the Bank of Tanzania on a rollout called TIPS. And so Bank of Tanzania is obviously the national bank of Tanzania. They also have 40 or 50 digital financial service providers that reach the direct audience. And so they all want to be on the same rails for the transmission of money. But the user experience is defined by the person that owns the customer, whether it be the financial service provider, the bank, the mobile network operator, the merchant, et cetera. So that front end is really owned by the person that owns the relationship with the customer.
Okay, so do you have to have hooks, for lack of a better word, into where the money is coming from and where it's going? I mean, it's probably different for every situation, but you have the person who wants to send money using the rails that you're setting up here, using the this plumbing that you're setting up, but the front end could be delivered through you or through whatever. But how difficult is it to get the back end companies like the one that you mentioned to integrate? Or is that do you have to like reverse engineer these things that are open, or is it different for every single situation?
No, the APIs are essential. Open APIs are essential to make sure that we can exchange content across different platforms. So again, in the case of an implementation, first of all, Mojaloop Foundation, open source nonprofit foundation, we implement nothing. We develop the software and we give it away, under an open source license. What we have is an ecosystem of systems integrators, software providers, financial service entities that are looking at Mojaloop and saying, how can I configure a system that touches all these points that I want to integrate with? So it's not, out of the box, shrink wrapped in a situation. You want to create a payments hub. You have to do some planning. You have to establish the rules that are in compliance with your local regulatory requirements. So all that innovation and account management happens at the company level, the folks deploying Mojaloop. We basically allow them to deploy Mojaloop as the underpinnings, the rails, and then they use our open APIs to plug in as needed to the appropriate systems.
Interesting. Okay, so your client, for lack of a better way to put it, the people who are actually installing the software, these are the financial institutions, or these are people who are just trying to make it easier to send money? And
no, it's the financial institutions for the most part,
okay.
Or mobile network operators. For example, Orange and MTN have a joint venture called Mowali, and they've implemented Mojaloop as the rails to connect certain gateways between Cote d'Ivoire and Egypt and France. And so they've implemented themselves a Mojaloop instance so that they can connect different markets together using those rails.
Okay. So I guess this would make a lot of sense too for a mobile provider where there may not be internet access or phones not smart enough to actually use, IP protocol. They can just use text messaging and things like that. Is that a use case that makes? Okay. All right. That
because if you look
things up a lot.
Yeah, if you look at the continent of Africa and the market share of the mobile phone markets, very high very high percentage of Android-based smart. I wouldn't call them smartphones, but advanced mobile phones. They use QR codes a lot, and Apple, Samsung probably have single-digit market share. It may be higher in some very, very select metro markets, but by and large, the people that are using mobile phones, and there's a lot of people using mobile phones in Africa, they're using Android-based phones that are multifunction, but not uber smartphones. So we really need to be able to service folks that don't have, NFC chips and other things that would provide a different type of experience than what we're trying to serve in the continent. So
you mentioned earlier M-Pesa, and I'm wondering if you could, I know what that is, but I have a feeling a lot of our listeners don't. So you want to tell us what that is, and then we can get into, some questions about kind of the vernacular of the way the financial systems work in Africa?
Yeah, well, M-Pesa was one of the first impactful mobile money implementations, starting in Kenya and then crossing several countries in Africa. But it is a proprietary, for-profit, single account experience. It's not an open, interoperable digital platform. So if you're in the M-Pesa network, great. But that doesn't serve a lot of people that are not in the M-Pesa marketplace.
And M-Pesa grew out of the phone companies, didn't it? Didn't the phone companies come up with it?
Yep.
Yeah. A good friend of ours who we ought to have on the show, JP Rangaswamy, I worked for him at BT in the UK. And one of the things he said was our core competency is not communications, it's actually billing. And so I bring that up because that's kind of how phone companies have worked traditionally. It's one of the reasons they've kind of resisted the internet and, kind of been dragged kicking and screaming into the internet world, because where can they set up the billing sphincters in the plumbing? But you're in the plumbing business. I'm wondering to what extent you're maybe up against something with that.
Oh, no. In fact, we hope to be working very closely with them. As I've mentioned, MTN and Orange is already on board. Look at what happened in the mobile wallet space in the last decade. AT&T, Verizon, name all the brands, Deutsche Telekom, France, all the major national telecom players wanted in the wallet space. Because, a piece of that transaction, even if it's a very small percentage of that transaction, is compelling when you have millions and millions of customers. What happened? Apple, Google, Samsung locked down the wallets and cut all the carriers out. That's not necessarily the case, particularly in Africa, where most of the phones are Android based. So then the wallet's not locked down. So it's a much more open opportunity for anyone that wants to leverage a relationship with a consumer on the ground, whether it be the mobile network operator or merchant or bank, can engage with digital transactions with that recipient and not be forced out as you've seen in North America and Europe.
That's really interesting in a way, because I think in the U.S. and probably in Europe as well, we're so so accustomed to being in this environment where we're either Apple or Google. I mean, Apple and Google are your front doors to the mobile internet, and you don't really know to what extent they dominate, and you go up to the cash register and you could slap your phone onto a thing and that's what pays for you. That's the mobile wallet, right? When you're dealing with that. Yeah. When you're slapping your phone on something. And it's interesting that the phone companies are the ones that are really in the front in Africa. And we may actually be seeing more innovation there than we see here because we're stuck with these two companies. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah. I mean, and again, 10 years ago, there was a project called ISIS, unfortunately named, which was a collaboration, I believe, between AT&T, Verizon, and other U.S. carriers to create an integrated wallet. And, they just had, they had some false starts. They were early to market. There was not necessarily good customer awareness or interest in adoption. And in the meantime, in the background, the handset manufacturers locking down their NFC chips and their EMVCo relationship, and they just created a lock on their devices that just bypassed the carriers altogether. So the folks in developing markets where, particularly Apple and high-end smartphones on the Android side are not dominant, there's less likelihood that kind of lockdown can occur. There's not enough market right now for.
So the idea of a digital wallet, here in the US it's prevalent, but it's still very much just a convenient way to access money that is in a bank account or on a credit card. In a less developed area of the world, or particularly in a spot where there are different currencies. Does your program allow for conversion? And if so, is that still a responsibility of the financial institutions that are installing it, or how does that work? Because if I want to pay in local currency, in my local currency, when I'm going somewhere, I use a Visa card and it's automatically changed. And that's, just because I have a Visa card, but that's not something that's prevalent in all of the countries that you're talking to. So is there some sort of a conversion mechanism that's either built into the program, or is that just depending on who implements it and that's still all their internal stuff? Or is that not even an issue for what you're trying to cover?
No, it's very much an issue. Multi-currency, cross-border currency exchanges is very much part of the solution. What we need to do is make sure that we can accommodate that transfer, that we can allow the financial service provider, if you will, to establish the rules and governance for how money is transferred, how when someone says, I want to deposit X dollars of a local currency and transmit it to this other phone number in another currency, that before I hit the send, I'm getting a quote back as to what the settlement is. So that has to be a combination of using our technology with the bank or financial institution establishing the rules for how those transactions will be settled.
Okay. All right. So the answer is
so it's
yes.
This is not this is not an out of the box experience, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because if you think about currencies and you think about regulators, every country, we have to address unique regulatory requirements. That's why they have to be able to customize the rules for how transactions are processed in their environment with their customer base.
Okay, so let me bring up the big digital elephant in the room. The whole idea of cryptocurrency was to address situations like this, right? So that there's a decentralized, immutable ledger of transactions that can be either representative of some other currency, like a USD coin, which is a stable coin, so that it's not subject to the volatility of the crypto markets. Is there any utilization of the idea of a crypto back end? Because it seems like that's just a brilliant way to transfer funds, but just to have a record of that's not tied to a specific place. But I guess that's not the end all solution, because not everybody has the super smartphones with a wallet on it, that sort of thing. So I don't think that, like, why do you even exist? Why don't we just use crypto? That's not my question, to be clear. I'm just thinking that there's some great advantage if there could be crypto back ends to this that would make that transfer even quicker.
Yeah, so a couple of things. If we can all acknowledge that crypto's in its really early stages of adoption, even in advanced countries. So there's a lot to learn there. Our assumption going into this was any currency, whether it be fiat or crypto, can transfer through our plumbing, if you will. It's not up to us to establish those terms and conditions for the various currencies. It's up to the implementer to accommodate the various currencies, again, whether they be crypto or not. So we want to make sure that it doesn't preclude it. And certainly there's a lot of underlying technology in the blockchain space which has helped enable these types of transactions. But we don't develop for crypto per se. We're developing to make sure that no matter what you want to send through our rails, it will reach its destination safely and securely.
Okay, and I think that
now the other.
No, go ahead.
The other thing is, rather than focus our next set of energy on crypto, our next challenge is central bank digital currency. And so we just recently partnered with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, who also is keenly interested in CBDC. And what they want to do is work with us to establish some pilot projects on wholesale CBDC, we're not anywhere near, as a society to implement wholesale retail CBDC down to every consumer in the marketplace. What we need to do first is make sure the plumbing works and make sure the wholesale settlements are well tested and proven out. And there's been a lot of projects in market in recent years. I think if you look at, around the world, there's, let's say, Bahamas, European Union, Thailand, Singapore, Australia, Cambodia, Japan, Canada, all running CBDC pilots. Many of them launched last year, and we're seeing accelerated interest in that. So our next development center of gravity, if you will be on CBDC. First wholesale, a few years out from now, retail. But we need to make sure that the central banks have a mechanism for distributing their digital currencies out to their to their customers, particularly at a time, with migrant populations, aid payments, et cetera, wanting to get less wedded to cash and doing more digital for safety reasons, not only physical safety, but even like COVID and virus transmission. So that's our next area of focus rather than crypto per se. As I said, we can accommodate crypto, but it's not a center of gravity for us. Our next center of gravity will be CBDC.
Well, I have a question about CDBC because I think it's a rich vein. But first, I have to let folks know that joining Club TWiT is another great way to support our network. You got to know about Club TWiT. As a member, you get access to the ad-free versions of all the shows that are on TWiT, including, I suppose, this ad too. It maybe won't run, but you get the ad-free version, and as well as other great benefits. There's a bonus TWiT Plus feed that includes footage and discussions that didn't make the final show edit, as well as bonus shows we've started, such as the Untitled Linux show hosted by our very own Jonathan Bennett, often guest hosting here, the GizFizz, and other monthly members-only content. Then there's the community side of this thing. We have a really fun Discord server that's available only for our Club TWiT members. There you can chat with other members about the shows and many other topics and non-tech topics, tech and non-tech. There's even a beer and cocktails chat on our Discord. So sign up for Club TWiT for the cost of one fancy cup of coffee per month, just $7. $7 a month gets you into the club. Head over to twit.tv/clubtwit. That's twit.tv/clubtwit and join today. Okay, so CDBCs. I have a feeling that there's maybe even a coming war between CDBCs and all the cryptos in there, because obviously it's going to be cryptographically or cryptologically. There's going to be crypto involved in it. It's just not going to involve the same sort of back ends. So I'm wondering if what you're doing by concentrating on CDBCs is kind of placing a bet on the marketplace. Is that right?
Well, I know one thing is when it comes to the transfer of money by a country, the regulator is going to rule. So crypto will have its own camp to partake in, but we need to make sure that everything that we do with Mojaloop is in line with what's happening on the ground in the different regulatory bodies in each country. And so again, by working with MAS and others, we're trying to set the stage for a template for how to implement wholesale CBDC from central banks out to their constituents, if you will. Crypto, we don't have to bet on crypto. We just need to make sure that crypto can flow. But we don't have to do anything unique or exceptional to make that happen. What we need to do is make sure that the regulators are familiar with the opportunity of CBDC and how they can implement it in a way that reaches the largest number of their citizens as possible.
And so this is the open source part of me. I think that while having the central banks digitally manage and flow money is important, I think that there's an open aspect to that that's vital, so that just the word centralized itself starts to get pretty scary if, a small group of people control how money flows. But something I wanted to bring up, and this is going to seem tangential, but bear with me. Recently, it's been in the news that open source has kind of proven its mettle, if you will. So if you're Doc, you probably read this story. The social network that Donald Trump is starting, it's like called Truth or something, where he was kicked off platforms. So this one. So he's starting his own social media platform. The problem is they used a Mastodon install and just tried to strip out all of the licensing information, and that's illegal, right? I mean, open is open. Anybody can use it, but you have to release the source code. And so I guess this is more of a thank you that your product is open source so that these things can't be done in secret and then used to stop people from participating and benefiting from the work of others. Doc, do you have any thoughts on this Mastodon thing? I mean, in the open source world, it's kind of like, look, see, we told you, it's really important.
Well, I think that the, hang on a second, this is, my phone never rings except during the show, and then I forgot to turn off the sound. So that was a thing. I don't know if I seriously turned it off or not. I think the way to loop these together is I think what happened with that was that oh my gosh. Oh, good. Well, it's on a speaker in here, and I don't know.
We're not hearing it, so that's...
You're not hearing it.
So
the thing is, you can't tell. I mean, it's like electronics are so helpful, and sometimes only the puzzled-looking guy is getting the clue. Anyway, I think what happened with the Trump thing versus Mastodon, and by the way, we avoid politics on this show, and so this is not political. I actually think they didn't know what they were doing. I think it's as simple as that. They just didn't know what they were doing. And they had no idea what open source was about. They took some available code that was laying around, did a bunch of stuff with it. But I'm not that familiar with it. But I think where it may apply in your case, Paula, is that you're dealing with a lot of countries, a lot of institutions, a lot of normalities. And I'm wondering if open source is that clear to everybody as to how it works when it comes to implementing it.
Thank you for raising that, because I started my open source journey in 2002 as general manager of United Linux. And everyone in your audience that recognizes that brand is probably groaning right now. It was a joint venture between SCO, SUSE, Connectiva, and Turbo Linux, funded by IBM, HP, and others. It was great in theory, but in practicality, there were some legal matters that got everyone kind of in hot water. And so I don't want to go down that path, but that dates me. I've been in and around open source for a long time. And so I walk into this new opportunity with a set of biases with regard to people's knowledge and awareness and acceptance of open source. And I had to reset that. I'm going to the Finos event next week in New York City to talk to the fintech sector about open source Mojaloop. And there's still skepticism. I mean, Wall Street has embraced Linux, no question. But once you get further afield, Europe is very open source literate, of course, and certain parts of Asia. But on the continent of Africa in particular, it's still pretty new. And while everyone seems to be comfortable and familiar with Linux, once you start taking it to more specialized applications, people are concerned. The first thing that a lot of the players on the ground felt was we're trying to compete with them. And so that's why I kind of remind people regularly, we are an open source nonprofit foundation. We develop software via a community model. We do not sell anything. And so we give this away, use it, love it, hate it, but we are not trying to compete with you. If you have a solution in market today, this might supplement it. It might provide new business opportunity for you. But we're not trying to compete with the players on the ground in the various countries in Africa. The other issue that comes up, are the old, FUD factors that you heard in the open source space before is security. And of course, you guys know many eyes on a problem allow it to be diminished very quickly. So we have to address those issues as if they are new. But I think what's really appealing, particularly in developing countries, is first of all, the lower capital costs up front. Obviously, no licensing fees, but creating turnkey proof of concepts and sandboxes for them that they can test out, kick the tires without making a significant capital investments key. And we really want to get to a point where they can test anything out, on a cloud-based platform, even if they might not deploy it on the cloud, but be able to test the waters and kick the tires very cost effectively. Secondly, the lower maintenance costs and the lower costs to acquire additional functionality. So we already have folks that are in deployment mode, like Mwali and Bank of Tanzania. They're already in this virtuous feedback loop with us in our community saying, we'd like to see some tweaks here. We'd like to see some new features or functionalities. We'd like to see more testing there. So they're starting, now that they're involved, they're starting to see the benefits of this community approach rather than calling a vendor and having to pay every time they have a request. And then that, lack of vendor lock-in is also very appealing to them. So they might hire a firm to help them deploy, might hire a different firm to help them operate their hub, and they may tweak it over time. So as they become more immersed in a project, they start it starts revealing the benefits of open source to them. But it's definitely, we're in reset mode. I've had to kind of dust off the old vernacular of why open source, because we're in a market that has not seen it as openly embraced as you've seen, over the last 20 years in North America, Europe, and other markets.
So Jonathan Bennett actually mentioned to us in the back channel here that the reason Mastodon has issue with the website is because of the AGPL license that it's licensed under, and that really made me think. I'm sure that a lot of thought was put into which specific open source license that you use on your project. What is that, and could you elaborate on why you chose that one?
Yeah, what we wanted to do is reduce friction and reduce skepticism. We didn't want to create a vanity license. We know that's not very attractive in the marketplace. So we opted for the Apache software license. Well known, well adopted, well understood, and doesn't provide challenges for the various types of entities that consume open source. Some companies are very averse to GPL like licensing. We felt Apache had the best profile for us and the largest group of individuals that are comfortable and accepting of that license.
So I'm wondering, as it seems to me what you've got there is a real learn by doing project, because you're being deployed in so many places and in so many ways. And I'm wondering to what extent your, the various organizations using Mojaloop's Rails are wanting to contribute code to it, or even in a position to contribute code to it. Or are they just like saying, we're glad you guys are developing this, we're going to use it? Or are they actually participating?
It's early. I mean, we literally launched Mojaloop Foundation last May. And we are in the throes of several deployments right now. Some of these deployments will take 18 to 24 months to go live, maybe even longer. So usually we start with pilot projects. So it's during that pilot project exercise that they start realizing the benefit. But still aren't ready yet to contribute back. In some cases, they've been hiring other parties to help them on the implementation. So they may not actually have the skills themselves to be developing new modules and contributing back. Right now, a major contribution is flagging gaps or requirements that we feel would benefit all. And so our development community can say, this has critical mass. We didn't think of that, or this is something we need to re-energize our activities around. I think the contribution back will come over time. I was talking to Gab, the ED, the executive director of the Finos organization, about this recently. And, are the financial sector players giving back? It's kind of an unnatural act. I mean, think about it. They've been the customer for so long. They've been procuring software for so long. What do you mean you want me to give something back? I'm the customer. But once they get enmeshed in the project and they start establishing relationships with the community, so they come up with a feature or issue that they want to address. They have conversations with the community. They start realizing that it's not only can they have a dialogue, but they don't have to pull out their checkbook when they have that dialogue. So yes, learning by doing is an important part of this, evolving them into giving back. If they never give back, could we still exist? Yes, we would. Have our community dependent on creating those new enhancements and features and such. Not untenable, but ideally, if they create something in-house for a particular function that has broad appeal, ideally, we'd love to see it contributed back. So where we can do that coaching and mentoring, we will do so. But it's so early in our evolution. I would say that's not our top priority right now. Ultimately, I'd love to see that happen. But I want to see people live and running first. And then we can do the harvest, if you will, of code that makes sense to bring back into our core.
Well, so obviously then you're doing the most, not you personally, but I mean, your team is doing all or most of the development. Where are your current pain points? I mean, what are the issues that are really frustrating or a struggle or the focus of most of your development prowess?
Yeah. So to clarify, our team is our community. So we don't employ developers at all. Mojaloop Foundation does not. Okay. So, we're a purist. We maintain the code base as a steward, but the developers are at Google, at Coil, at Modusbox, at Ripple, et cetera. All the players that are partaking of the Mojaloop stack. So I think the pain points are probably, it depends on who you ask, but I would say a couple of things that are really important for us right now is ISO integration, this whole messaging protocol 2022 that we need to implement and test, really important for many of the financial institutions. I wouldn't say it's a challenge, it's just a priority. I think another challenge is deciding when do we architect version 2? Okay, so we've version 1 was started 5 years ago by the Gates Foundation, a core team of developers that they hired from several different companies, including Coil and Ripple and others. So they've gotten to a point where it's a pretty robust platform, but obviously things have revealed themselves to be ripe for kind of re-architecting, going to the next version. When do we do that? Do we do it now, bite the bullet? It's a major undertaking. Do we do it modularly? And look at certain segments of our code base and say, okay, this needs to be, re-engineered and re-architected for the next, iteration. So, well beyond my pay grade. I'm a business person, not a software architect. But that's a conversation that is unfolding within the developer community. I should note we meet 4 times a year. Up until recently, we used to meet face to face, but we just met last week for 3 full days. And the developers all come together. They report on all their work stream progress. They set the priorities for the next, what we call program increment. So every 12 to 13 weeks, we do a check-in. How are we progressing on code? What are the priorities? What do we need to focus on for the next 12 to 13 weeks? So I would say, the big question is if and when and how we architect for the next version. major version.
So I'm wondering, as it becomes more major and more stable and more part of the infrastructure of the way payments are made and the various parties get pulled together, what's happened in the past with open source projects, not all of them, but a lot of them, I'm thinking of Red Hat, with Linux, it was Red Hat, and then later for Ubuntu, there was Canonical comes along. A corporate shows up and says, this is really great. We can sell. We're a B2B seller. We're a B2B arms dealer to big companies, and they could take what you're doing in a good way and we're going to be your major supplier. These banks and those telcos, and just go across all of them and be a big supplier to those. Is that a possible future that you see, or is this maybe what Orange and its partners are doing already? I'm just curious to what happens. Yeah, go ahead.
To be glib, knock yourself out. Would love to see someone make a business at the scale of Red Hat off of Mojaloop. That said, I think I'd rather see multiples. I don't like a monolith. It's actually why United Linux was formed, by the way. IBM and others were concerned that Red Hat was becoming a little too dominant. So having multiple players would be ideal. To give choice and who a bank goes to for provide the services and implementation support to get up and running. As I said, we're Apache licensed. People are free to implement and sell services around it, and we encourage that. We do have some smaller players doing that today and making a business out of it. But I expect that as we see momentum with deployments, you'll start seeing some of the bigger players coming in as well, and we're perfectly fine with that. I think the other thing that's unique about the market we serve is that in a lot of cases, these central banks do not have the money or resources to deploy new innovation. So they either are delaying projects or cobbling together legacy code and applications. So making a leapfrog with new technology such as Mojaloop it has some challenges. And in many cases, some of these developing countries are depending on grants to fund these transitions. And there's a lot of large, very, very large grant-making institutions out there that are helping fund infrastructure development in various countries. So there are resources to come to play. But what it means is that it's a more complex sales cycle for the marketplace. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the ecosystem is trained and up to speed, able to deliver when a bank comes forth and says, okay, we now have secured the funding to do this project. But it's not your traditional sales rep knocks on the door of the CTO and says, I want to sell you something. It's more complex than even, a major banking implementation in a developed country.
So I have one more question, and then I know we have to move on because that's just how time goes. But I'm curious. So your code is all available on GitHub. Has anybody taken your code and done something that you didn't expect, or that's cool or new, or nifty projects? It's possible that it's too new for something like that to happen. But I'm just curious if you've seen any things that you didn't expect to happen.
Yeah, we've seen a project that's getting ready to launch in Myanmar, which is tied to the microfinance industry, which wasn't necessarily our target space, but that's something that's showing some promise. We also we recently participated in a hackathon with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. They were focused on retail CBDC, but several institutions leverage Mojaloop as the back end to that, which, for the wholesale settlement part of that implementation, which was great. And we're seeing a lot of demos. We've done a couple of hackathons in markets in the last year or two. So we've seen some good demos. What I want to see is as demos start getting some funding and venture funds behind them so that they can roll out the ideas into full-blown solutions. But I think, Shawn, it really is a bit early for us to see, earth-shattering innovation thus far. I think we're already providing some earth-shattering innovation. We encourage it. As I said, we do hackathons and such. We have a very open community. But I think as we gather steam, we'll start seeing some things that surprise us, will be a happy surprise.
That's a much more awesome answer than I was expecting. So thank you.
It was a yes plus. I like that. I have one that actually has to do with foundations. So I have I won't name names, but there's at least one foundation I know that, went to an underserved area, picked a topic, did a whole bunch of work there, did a lot of study and so forth, but then gave up and left. But you've got at least 3 or 4 foundations there that are funding an open source project that cannot help but have leverage, it seems to me. So I'm wondering if you're seeing changes on the foundation side, because you're dealing with several of them at once. Is there is there some kind of change going on? There's for those watching, there are a bunch of them there, Gates, Google, Rockefeller, Coil. Yeah, what's happening with them?
Yeah, what's interesting is I've recently become involved with the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which Rockefeller is very active in, as is Gates Foundation and many others, UNICEF et al. So it's DPGA, Digital Public Goods Alliance. And what they've done is create a directory of open source projects that are for public good. And actually, I meet monthly with them with 7 other DPG executive directors that are doing open source projects, and we're sharing best practices, lessons learned, a little bit of a wine fest at times when things aren't going our way, but it's helpful to have other executive directors on the horn to talk about the challenges, whether it be staffing or deployments or fundraising, et cetera. I think probably the common theme that I'm hearing out of the open source groups that are part of the DPGA is the funding for pilots and deployments. And so that's resonating with the Gates Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation and others. There's many, Ford Foundation, there's many others, because they're all getting requests for funding, right? For pilots, for proof of concepts, et cetera. If there's a way that we can make that more efficient, that we can speak in a common language, that we can get a better sense of what their timings are for funding, that would be really helpful. I mean, I came into this role having a lot of experience in open source technology consortium standards, even in the payment sectors with NFC, but the nonprofit philanthropic arm of consortia was relatively new to me, and it's complex. The grant process is complex. It's, there's a whole different set of actors. I mean, me pick up the phone and call Google is a natural act for me as a technology consortium leader. But going to the Rockefellers and Gates, et cetera, has been a new experience. And it's been great to participate with the DPGA team because, as I said, we share best practices, and that feedback goes back to the grant makers that, these are important projects. Here are the things we need. Let's be more efficient about how we communicate with each other and secure grants.
So we are down to the final minutes here. So we always end with a series of questions. The first, if you could answer briefly, is there any question you wanted us to ask and we haven't asked and you would love to answer anyway? So one of those.
I can't think of it. You guys are pretty thorough.
That's good. Yes. That's good. Curiosity gives birth to the kitten. There it is. So the second is, do you have anything to say about blockchain? You probably said it already, actually, with the crypto answer earlier.
Yeah, I've always skirted on the periphery of blockchain in my career. In an NFC forum, we looked at it, but it wasn't important to our standard per se at the time. Yeah. For Mojaloop, I think underlying technologies, like Hyperledger, for example, really important for us to understand and rationalize. In fact, I'm meeting with the ED of Hyperledger next week in New York for just that topic. I think there's a lot of advancements that have been done in both Hyperledger and crypto that benefit us. And so
is that Brian Bellendorf by any chance? Is that Brian? Are you meeting with Brian? No, okay. He's been on the show, that's why I asked. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no. So anyway, I think, we benefit from some of those advances. I mean, the industry benefits from standards, doesn't it? Right now, if you look at the different technologies that Mojaloop leverages, Kubernetes and Docker and Linux, of course, Kafka, Rancher, Node.js. So any kind of standards that are evolving by the investment of the other tech players is important to us. And so we try to stay abreast of that. Of course, particularly my technologists.
Excellent. So final two questions. What are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
I don't script. I'm a business person. Right. So, I don't have to go down that gnarly religious discussion because that's not my bailiwick.
And please don't say your favorite text editor is Microsoft Word, because I think we'll have to bleep that out for this show.
My favorite text editor is whatever form comes into my inbox and people say read and review. I'm really agnostic. So, it comes from all walks, really.
Well, this has been great. This has been a great show. I love the topic because it's bound to change and evolve and grow, and it's clear that your energies are just fantastic on this thing. I'm expecting to see lots of progress. So,
great.
Also, I came in dumb. Yeah, I came in dumb, and I get it now. No, I get it now. So thank you.
Shawn came in dumb and went out smart. Yeah,
I don't know, smart. That's a stretch.
Yeah, no, you're smart. Yeah. But thanks so much, Paul. This has been absolutely great.
It was my pleasure. Nice to meet you, Shawn, and good talking with you, Doc.
Likewise. So, Shawn, that
was great. No, really. I mean, that was great. I'm glad that I didn't get it at first, because the conversation that we had made me get it. So if there are other people who didn't get it, hopefully, as I was informed, so were they.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is that the less privileged parts of the world are actually, people in general are resourceful, and this is, getting them code they can be resourceful with, and getting, especially Rails on payments. That's just so critical, and I think they're really in a sweet spot of the future.
I do too. And I like the idea of the plumbing to connect different facilities for making payments and stuff, because it's as much as I'm excited about crypto and blockchain stuff, there's still areas that are rough to reach, and I hadn't thought about no internet but having a phone with teleservice, like text messaging. That's a huge thing, because that's different than direct internet connection. So that was awesome to hear about. Yeah,
it's been terrific. So, what do you got to plug, dude?
I mean, to be honest,
how many cartoons have you written so far? You're up to 100.
Today was 190. So
190.
I'm pretty happy about that. Yeah, 6 a week. Yeah, Monday through Saturday. So yeah, pretty excited. I'm wearing. In fact, my T-shirt is custom. You can't buy one of these, but this is Spot. One of the characters in my comic is on my T-shirt. Yeah,
there you go.
That's my plug.
And you actually have a Spot plugin. You have a Spot plushie. You have a 3-dimensional Spot over your left shoulder.
I do, and I have a ton of them. They'll be for sale in time for Christmas. So that's all I got. I just like being on the show.
You're at the head end of a supply chain there. Very good. Well, thanks a lot, Shawn. This has been great having you on. Yeah. And so people, next week we're going to have Costa Peric, and Costa, I know from having worked with him at Swift in Belgium. Swift moves money between banks and so forth on an open source project years ago, and he's the chairman of the board of Mojaloop. So in a certain way, even though it's going to be a discrete show, in a sense, it's going to be a whole bunch of new topics. It's going to be part 2 of this particular thread that we were on today. So come back next week for that one. Until then, I'm Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly, and we'll see you then.
Hey, you don't have to wait till the weekend to get the tech news you need. Join Jason Howell and myself, Micah Sargent, for Tech News Weekly, where we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news.